Welcome back to our channel. In today's feature, we delve into the extraordinary and turbulent life of one of rock and roll's most defiant pioneers, a man whose fiery piano playing and wild stage presence helped define an era, Jerry Lee Lewis. From his humble beginnings in Faraday, Louisiana, to the flashing lights of global stardom, Jerry Lee Lewis's story is not just one of musical brilliance. It's a saga of sacrifice, scandal, personal tragedy, and the relentless pursuit of artistic identity. His rise to fame, beginning at the legendary Sun Records, would cement him as one of the most electrifying performers the music world had ever seen. But behind the pounding piano keys and the frenzied performances lay a man whose life was as volatile as the music he made. The boy from Faraday. Born on September 29, 1935, amid the crushing weight of the Great Depression, Jerry Lee Lewis entered a world scarred by economic struggle. The small town of Faraday, Louisiana offered little by way of opportunity, yet the Lewis household brimmed with dreams. It didn't take long for his parents to notice something exceptional in their son, a raw, burning musical talent. In a move that defied logic and financial reason, they mortgaged their farm to buy Jerry a piano. It was an unthinkable gamble for a family barely scraping by, but one that would alter the course of music history. This gesture wasn't merely about buying an instrument. It was an act of radical belief, a declaration that their boy was destined for something greater. It speaks volumes about the environment that shaped him. Faraday wasn't just a town. It was a crucible for creativity and spirituality. Practicing alongside his cousins Mickey Gilley, who would become a country music star, and Jimmy Swaggart, later a famed televangelist, Lewis's early musical world was shaped by gospel choirs, rural rhythm, and southern grit. They hoodiming on Jekyll Frenzy Live. Music wasn't a solitary endeavor. It was a communal rhythm that pulsed through every Sunday service and front porch jam session. The trio may have taken different paths, music, ministry, and showbiz, but their roots were entangled in the same southern soil, nurtured by faith, family, and an unshakable belief in performance. Fame, fire, and the pyramid of sacrifice. There's a poetic truth in saying that Jerry Lee Lewis's life resembled a pyramid. The higher he climbed, the more he sacrificed. With every hit record, every uproarious stage dive, and every headlined tour, something else slipped away. Privacy, stability, and often happiness. The same parents who gave up their farm for a piano understood the stakes. That sacrifice, noble as it was, came with a cost. They wagered their future on a dream, and Jerry would spend the rest of his life both honoring and being haunted by that dream. His performance style was a frenzy, pounding keys, kicking pianos, setting instruments on fire. It wasn't just music, it was an exorcism. And behind every wild performance lay a deeper need, to connect, to matter, to survive the storm that raged within him. Fame wasn't just a goal, it was a battlefield. There's a haunting truth here. Anything can be sacrificed in the name of success. Money, comfort, relationships, but joy, real joy, is harder to replace. For Jerry, joy lived in the music. Even as scandals piled up and personal demons clawed at his heels, the piano was his one faithful companion, a source of release, redemption, and raw identity. A family marked by love and loss. While Jerry Lee Lewis's public life exploded with controversy and chaos, his personal life was no less complex. He fathered 6 children, a reflection perhaps of his deep yearning for connection and legacy. But this desire came with profound sorrow. In 1962, tragedy struck when his young son, Steve Allen Lewis, drowned in the family swimming pool. He was just 3 years old. For a man known for defying norms and grabbing life by the horns, this loss was a wound that never fully healed. The image of Jerry Lee Lewis, wild-haired, pounding piano keys with a devilish grin, stood in stark contrast to the grieving father shattered by an unthinkable accident. Years later, another tragedy would deepen that sorrow. In 1973, Jerry Lee Lewis Jr., his namesake and aspiring musician, died in a car accident at the age of 19. To lose one child is unimaginable. To lose two is soul-crushing. These weren't just isolated tragedies. They were defining moments that cut to the core of a man already walking a razor's edge between genius and destruction. These losses, while largely overshadowed by the drama of his public life, deeply shaped Jerry's emotional world. Behind the bravado, the whiskey-soaked interviews, and the chaotic concerts was a father carrying unbearable grief. Legacy of a Southern rebel. Despite the chaos, the scandals, and the storms, Jerry Lee Lewis remained a singular force in music. His influence extended far beyond rock and roll. He blurred genres, fused gospel with boogie-woogie, and brought a preacher's fire to a honky-tonk world. Without him, the doors wouldn't have been kicked open for Elvis, Johnny Cash, or countless others. Yet his life raises uncomfortable questions. How much are we willing to forgive genius? How far can talent carry a man when his personal choices threaten to eclipse his accomplishments? Jerry Lee Lewis lived at the extremes, too wild for Nashville, too unruly for polite society, yet too magnetic to ignore. He was both sinner and savior, outlaw and artist, rebel and revolutionary. The same fingers that blessed the piano keys also pointed toward scandal, defiance, and self-destruction. But through it all, the music endured. And maybe that's the greatest testament of all, that despite every headline, every tragedy, and every misstep, when Jerry Lee Lewis sat at the piano, he reminded the world what raw, untamed talent looked like. Invincible on stage, fragile in life. There was an undeniable irony to Jerry Lee Lewis's life. The man who seemed invincible behind a piano was heartbreakingly human away from it. Despite enduring personal tragedies that would shatter most people, Lewis kept going, recording, touring, and performing as if fueled by the very pain he carried. The loss of two sons, Steve Allen Lewis and Jerry Lee Lewis Jr., left scars far deeper than the public ever saw. And yet, he stood under the spotlight, defiant, pouring his sorrow into every explosive note. To the casual fan, his performances remained riveting, but for those listening closely, there were cracks in the fire, subtle moments of ache embedded in the defiance. His fingers still flew across the keys, but sometimes the fury felt like a shield, the swagger like a mask. Perhaps grief sharpened his edge, perhaps it softened it. Either way, it never left him. These losses did more than haunt a father. They echoed through his family's entire story. With 6 children, multiple marriages, and a career that left little time for domestic stability, Lewis's personal life was often a tangle of passion and pain. Children were occasionally caught in the whirlpool of scandal, with headlines more concerned about Jerry's affairs, arrests, or concert antics than about the quieter chaos unfolding at home. Behind the scenes, relationships frayed. Siblings bore emotional burdens. Some family members recoiled from the limelight, others were drawn to it. But the tremors of loss and legacy reverberated across generations, coloring how the Lewis name would be remembered. When viewed through the lens of that earlier metaphor, that joy cannot be sacrificed, Jerry's life becomes even more poignant. He lost 2 sons, 2 pieces of himself, and yet he never gave up the piano. It was his altar, his battlefield, his therapy. The stage gave him purpose, even when life off-stage seemed unmanageable. This dichotomy, a public figure undeterred, a private man devastated, adds depth to a legacy often misunderstood. Jerry Lee Lewis wasn't just the killer, a nickname earned for his wild energy and raucous shows. He was also a father who knew the darkest corners of grief, yet chose to keep singing. The career that never stopped swinging. Professionally, Lewis was a relentless force. In December 1956, His career officially launched when he began recording as a solo artist and session pianist for Sun Records, the Memphis label that gave birth to the careers of Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, and Carl Perkins. His piano playing didn't just accompany, it commanded. It dominated tracks like Carl Perkins' Matchbox, Your True Love, and Put Your Cat Clothes On. His unmistakable boogie style also powered Billy Lee Riley's Flying Saucer Rock and Roll. Then came his own hits. 1957 exploded with Whole Lotta Shakin' Goin' On, a cover of Big Maybell's song that Lewis transformed into a career-making moment. The track was bold, chaotic, and pure adrenaline, everything rock and roll was becoming. Then Great Balls of Fire arrived like a lightning strike. That one song catapulted him to international stardom. It also cemented his place as rock's first great wild man. His raw charisma and rebellious persona weren't just auditory, they were visual. In films like High School Confidential and Jamboree, audiences saw firsthand the magnetic mania that defined his performances. He didn't just play piano, he attacked it, straddled it, and made it his accomplice. Classical composer Michael Nyman once said that Lewis's raw, unfiltered energy influenced his own musical aesthetic, proof that even high art couldn't resist the gravitational pull of Jerry Lee Lewis. But as quickly as the fire burned, it began to flicker. In 1960, Lewis had only one notable hit, a cover of Ray Charles's What Did I Say? By 1961, while still touring Europe, he leaned into covers of classics like Sweet Little 16 and Good Golly Miss Molly, hoping to keep the magic alive. Some of these renditions were well received in European dance halls and discotheques, but in the US, the glow was dimming. There were still surprises. His playful instrumental version of In the Mood, released under the pseudonym The Hawk, offered a different kind of charm. But by 1963, his time at Sun Records had ended. He moved to Smash Records, a subsidiary of Mercury, hoping for a fresh start. That fresh start didn't come easy. The industry's confusion, what to do with Jerry Lee. By the mid-1960s, rock and roll had evolved. The Beatles were dominating airwaves. Folk music was turning political. Lewis, now past the peak of his early fame and still haunted by scandal, didn't fit neatly into any box. Mercury Records wasn't sure what to do with him. Was he a rock act? A country artist? A relic of a wilder, earlier time? One of Smash's first decisions was to package nostalgia, releasing golden hits of Jerry Lee Lewis, re-recordings of his Sun-era hits. It was a nod to the enduring loyalty of his European fan base, but not a creative rebirth. Then came an unexpected turn: country music. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Lewis leaned into his Southern roots and found surprising success on the country charts. Songs like Another Place, Another Time and What's Made Milwaukee Famous Has Made a Loser Out of Me reintroduced him to a new generation. They weren't frenzied like his rock hits. They were reflective, mournful, textured, and they worked. The same man who once set pianos on. It was a remarkable reinvention. Not many rock pioneers managed to survive the tidal shifts of the industry. Jerry did, not by clinging to the past, but by adapting in his own fiery way. His voice aged, his playing matured, and yet the spirit, that defiant, unpredictable energy, never left him. The lost years and an unlikely comeback. By the early 1960s, Jerry Lee Lewis was teetering on the edge of oblivion. The same scandal that nearly destroyed his career 5 years earlier still loomed over him like a specter. Despite bursts of energy and a flurry of recording activity, most of his early releases under Smash Records, albums like The Return of Rock, Memphis Beat, and Soul My Way, failed to gain commercial traction. Critics didn't ignore them entirely, but the public had moved on. At least, that's what everyone thought. Yet even in these so-called lost years, Lewis proved impossible to count out. In 1964, something unexpected happened. Live at the Star Club Hamburg, a concert album recorded in Germany with backing band the Nashville Teens erupted like a bombshell. It was raw, unfiltered, explosive. The kind of performance that reminded people why Lewis was once called the most dangerous man in rock and roll. Rolling Stone critic Milo Miles called it, "Not an album, it's a crime scene," writing that Lewis slaughters his rivals in a set that feels like one long convulsion. The audio captured a primal, almost spiritual rage. Ziggy Locke, the producer who recorded the show, managed to bottle lightning, and in doing so, reminded the world that the killer was far from finished. Even with this critical renaissance, mainstream American success remained elusive. That would soon change, from rock outlaw to country king. The turning point came on March 9, 1968, with the release of Another Place, Another Time. The song, written by Jerry Chestnut, marked a dramatic departure from Lewis's previous recordings. Gone was the boisterous rockabilly of his youth. In its place stood a world-weary ballad, steeped in heartbreak and age. No one expected it to make an impact, but it did. The single soared to number 4 on the Billboard Country chart and stayed there for an astonishing 17 weeks. At the time of the single's release, Lewis was playing the role of Iago in a rock musical adaptation of Othello called Catch My Soul in Los Angeles. But as the song climbed the charts, he was quickly pulled back to Nashville to record a full country album with producer Jerry Kennedy. What followed was nothing short of miraculous. In a world that had once rejected him, he now reigned supreme, and his past, once a liability, began to look like authenticity. Milking the legacy. Sensing the revival, his former producer Shelby Singleton, who had purchased Sun Records from Sam Phillips in 1969, began repackaging old, unreleased Jerry Lee Lewis tracks as if they were brand new. And it worked. The public, hungry for anything bearing his name, didn't care about the timeline. Songs like 1 Minute Past Eternity, which had been recorded years earlier, were released as singles and still reached number 2 on the country charts. Sun Records flooded the market with reissues. The Golden Cream of the Country, A Taste of Country, and other compilations of early material that now fit neatly into his new image. The lines between past and present blurred, but no one seemed to mind. Jerry Lee Lewis was back, and he was thriving. He also returned to the pop charts, albeit modestly. His renditions of Me and Bobby McGee in 1971 and Chantilly Lace in 1972 reminded fans that the fire hadn't gone out completely. In fact, a re-recording of his Sun-era hit, Drinkin' Wine, Spo-Dee O-Dee, reached number 20 on the country charts and even made a dent in the Billboard pop rankings, peaking at 41. The album it appeared on climbed to number 4 on the country chart, his best performance in years. By 1977, Lewis scored one final major hit with Mercury, Middle Age Crazy, a soulful reflection on aging and regret. It reached number 4 on the country chart and was a fitting capstone to his comeback decade. But even as he enjoyed commercial success and a somewhat repaired reputation, the shadows of his past continued to lurk, especially the scandal that had once made him a pariah. The scandal that refused to die. If there's one moment in Jerry Lee Lewis's life that fundamentally altered the trajectory of his career, and perhaps the entire history of rock and roll, it was the 1958 revelation that he had married his 13-year-old cousin, Myra Gale Brown. The news broke while he was on a triumphant tour of the UK. At just 22 years old, Jerry Lee was set to conquer Europe. But when a reporter asked Myra, who was traveling with him, how they were related, and she innocently replied that she was both his wife and cousin, the world recoiled. The tour was canceled after just a few dates. British media exploded in fury. Radio stations banned his music. His American career, which had been on an unstoppable ascent, collapsed almost overnight. He returned to the States in disgrace, playing $250 a night club gigs after once commanding thousands per show. His reputation was decimated. In later years, Lewis would attempt to explain, defend, or downplay the marriage. He claimed he didn't know she was 13 when they wed. Myra herself, in interviews and later memoirs, this scandal would follow him for the rest of his life. No matter how many hits he scored, how many genres he mastered, or how many accolades he received, the marriage remained a stain, a constant footnote to every article, every award, every obituary, the scandal that shattered stardom. At the time of his marriage to 13-year-old Myra Gale Brown, who was not just a minor but also his first cousin once removed, Jerry Lee Lewis was sitting on top of the world. A genuine rock and roll sensation, his songs had set airwaves ablaze and made him one of the most talked about performers on the planet. But once the marriage came to light, the fall from grace was swift and brutal. While the controversy erupted globally, it was in the United Kingdom that the backlash struck hardest. British tabloids tore into him with righteous fury, and radio stations, already suspicious of rock and roll's supposed threat to decency, boycotted his music outright. What began as a victory lap through Europe quickly spiraled into disaster. Concerts were canceled, journalists hounded him, and the tour, once a dream come true, turned into a shameful retreat. Back in the United States, things weren't much better. American media, still clinging to a squeaky clean image of 1950s pop culture, found itself scandalized. Rock and roll had already been branded as rebellious, even dangerous, and now Lewis became the poster child for everything parents feared. He wasn't just wild on stage, he had, in the eyes of many, crossed a moral line too far. The fact that his bride was family, and so young, triggered alarm across a country already bracing itself against the cultural tide rock and roll represented. The result? A career in free fall. Promoters abandoned him. Record stores pulled his albums. Radio silence replaced chart-topping hits. The very public that had once anointed him a king turned their backs almost overnight. It wasn't just a scandal. It was exile, crawling from the ashes. And yet, he never disappeared. Jerry Lee Lewis didn't vanish into obscurity or hide from the storm. He kept playing. Smaller venues, modest stages, anywhere that would still have him. By the early 1960s, he was performing again in Europe and booking clubs across the US. It was a quieter career, a shadow of what had been, but it was also a testament to his resilience. He fought for every inch of stage, every record sold, every second chance. And through it all, he proved what his critics had tried to deny, that his talent wasn't a phase, it wasn't a trick, it was real. These lean years also served as a kind of crucible. As the public memory of 1958 slowly began to dull, Lewis found a way to reposition himself. He didn't just adapt, he evolved. He turned toward country music, a genre more familiar with stories of heartache, mistakes, and redemption. If rock and roll had cast him out, country was willing to listen, and that, perhaps, was the most ironic outcome of all. The scandal that nearly ended him also rerouted him toward a different audience, a new beginning, and a comeback that would defy every expectation. The morality reckoning of 1958. The impact of the scandal extended beyond Jerry Lee Lewis's personal life. It was a pivotal moment in the evolution of celebrity culture, a moment that redefined how the public and the press viewed the personal conduct of entertainers. Before 1958, the private lives of performers were often whispered about but rarely scrutinized. After Lewis's marriage to Myra was exposed, that dynamic changed. He became a case study in how personal behavior could destroy public image, and in how the media, once friendly, could turn ruthlessly punitive. From that point on, celebrity conduct was no longer a private affair. The line between stage and home life grew thinner. If you wanted to be a star, you had to play by a broader set of rules. Jerry Lee Lewis, intentionally or not, had helped redraw the boundaries and paid a heavy price for it. A wild heart that never settled, 7 marriages, and a search for peace. If there was a chapter of Jerry Lee Lewis's life as turbulent as his career, it was his marital history. With 7 marriages to his name, his personal relationships reflected the same volatility, intensity, and unpredictability that marked his time in the spotlight. It began early. At just 16, Lewis married Dorothy Barton, a preacher's daughter. On paper, it was a traditional Southern union. In reality, it was short-lived. Their marriage lasted only 20 months, from February 1952 to October 1953. It was long enough to signal his desire for independence, but too brief to build a foundation. His second marriage, to Jane Mitchum, was equally complicated, not least because it overlapped with the start of his controversial third marriage to Myra Gale Brown. Jane was pregnant with his child when Lewis wed Myra, a situation that added another layer of scandal. The media pounced. Lewis, already under siege for marrying a child relative, was now also entangled in a messy love triangle. With Myra, he stayed married for over a decade, a period that encompassed both his greatest musical achievements and his deepest personal failures. Myra later revealed that the marriage was riddled with emotional abuse, infidelity, and psychological turmoil. And yet, for years, she remained silent, loyal to a man whose fame had cast a long and complicated shadow over her life. After Myra, the marriages continued, each seemingly more chaotic than the last. His union with Jaron Gunn Pate ended in tragedy when she drowned in a swimming pool. His marriage to Sean Michelle Stevens ended after just 77 days when she died under suspicious circumstances, a death that prompted a grand jury investigation, though no. His final marriage to Judith Brown in 2012 brought him a rare period of stability late in life. But by then, the pattern had already been set. Jerry Lee Lewis's romantic life wasn't just tabloid fodder. It was a reflection of a man who craved love but struggled to sustain it. These relationships, tumultuous, layered, tragic, told their own story. They hinted at emotional wounds that never healed, a restless heart that never found peace, and a man who, for all his genius, was often his own worst enemy. The final act of a rock and roll legend. By the time Jerry Lee Lewis celebrated his 85th birthday in October 2020, the world had changed, but his place in it hadn't. He was still revered, still standing, still the killer. The live-streamed tribute, hosted by actor John Stamos and featuring stars from across generations and genres, Willie Nelson, Elton John, Priscilla Presley, Mike Love, Joe Walsh, and many others, wasn't just a birthday celebration. It was a living memorial, a rare moment where music royalty from all corners of the industry paused to pay homage to a man who had shaped the very foundation they all stood upon. That gathering said something profound. Jerry Lee Lewis was more than just a controversial figure from rock's early days. He was a bridge between gospel and rock, rebellion and redemption, chaos and creativity. And perhaps more than anything, between eras. He had outlived most of his contemporaries, Elvis, Johnny Cash, Carl Perkins, all gone. But Jerry remained. The Last Man Standing album wasn't just a title, it was a declaration. Legacy forged in fire. Jerry Lee Lewis was a man of extremes, a Southern boy raised on gospel who later lit pianos ablaze. He channeled deep personal losses into electrifying performances and pushed boundaries both musically and personally. His piano was more than an instrument. It was his outlet, his weapon, and his voice. Despite scandals, addiction, and tragedy, Lewis endured. 7 marriages and 2 lost children might have broken others, but he kept creating. His shift to country music wasn't just reinvention, it was redemption. In heartbreak ballads like She Even Woke Me Up to Say Goodbye, fans saw not just a legend, but a survivor. Jerry Lee didn't follow trends. He was the trend, the final years and farewell. Though slowed by a stroke in 2019, Lewis never gave up. In 2020, he returned to the studio to record gospel, music that had shaped his early life. He passed away on October 28, 2022 at 87, but his legacy remained vivid. Tributes from fellow legends and fans alike honored a man who had never conformed and never apologized. The man, the myth, the killer. Jerry Lee Lewis lived a life of chaos and creativity. He fused country. Jerry Lee Lewis wasn't just part of rock and roll. He was rock and roll, raw, rebellious, unforgettable. And though he's gone, the legend of the killer lives on. Thanks for watching. If Jerry Lee Lewis's story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. What's your favorite memory or song? Let us know in the comments.